So what is street art? And does that have value for us as a society? These are the two questions that I want to touch on today, and then give you a look into my own practice as a street artist. I want to start off by acknowledging the indigenous communities, the Shoshone, the Kootenai, and the TEDxCoeurdalene, also known as the TEDxCoeurdalene. That's the name, as much as I can pronounce it, that they call themselves. It's important for me to start out with an indigenous land acknowledgement because that's something for us as a culture that often we overlook in terms of the history that we've been taught, overlooking the genocide of broken treaties and mistreatment of indigenous people. If we, as a culture, when we talk about today, the theme is comfortable being uncomfortable. If we're going to challenge ideas, we need to look at those narratives that we've been taught and reevaluate them if we're going to progress as a society. In the same way, if we're going to talk about street art today, we need to reorient the way that we see it. Because we're often taught that street art is inherently bad. It causes visual pollution that is detrimental to us as a society. But I want to contrast that with the culture of consumption that we're bombarded with every day. From billboards to online marketing to TV commercials. These commercials have impacts on us as a society that are often perverse in the way that they tell us that we do not look good enough, that we need to buy things that we cannot afford, and doing so in ways that are harmful for the environment. Generally, advertisements reinforce the status quo of our society. In contrast, street art gives us an ability to question the status quo. This is a piece by a street artist, Carolyn Caldwell. In a society that profits from your own self-doubt, liking yourself is a rebellious act. So I just want to look, this is a piece that I created. It's part of a series, we'll talk about it in a minute. It's called All My Friends Are Immigrants and Refugees. I did this with a group called Art and Ad Places. What Art and Ad Places does is they go around to different telephone booths across New York City. They take out the advertisements and put in pieces of artwork from a variety of different artists. This is not legal, they just have a key to the phone booths. But I think that phone booths are a really interesting thing. I mean, we have to ask ourselves, in the year 2020, why do we have phone booths? I mean, in New York, they're still all over the place. Almost all of us have cell phones, and even if you don't have a cell phone, I can tell you, you don't want to use the payphones in New York City. They're disgusting, and most of them don't work. What they do is they function as a mode of continuing advertising. So, this is another example of ways that we, as a society, accept unsolicited advertising without even realizing it, but we do not accept unsolicited art in the street. So, street art is not some homogeneous thing. Sometimes it is detrimental and bad, especially when I think about when it's related to marketing and real estate. But other times, it's important. It helps us challenge who we are, and it can serve as a mirror to us as a society. People often try to figure out what is street art versus graffiti versus public sculpture and community murals. How do these all fit in? Because they could all be considered street art in some way or another. But for me, it's not so important trying to decide what is what. I think we need to ask ourselves questions. Who put this there? Was it an individual or a business or a government? What is the story that they're trying to tell us? How does this affect the community that it's in? So those, for me, are more important than deciding, is this graffiti? Is it street art? That's not important for me. There are 4 things that I believe make street art unique compared to a lot of other kinds of art. The first is that street art is accessible and democratic in ways that other artwork is not. We often have to go to museums or galleries or theaters to see work, but this can be geographically distant. expensive, and socially inaccessible. I know a lot of people who do not feel comfortable in a lot of those places for a variety of reasons. But street art meets us where we are. It's on the street. It's also democratic in the sense that you don't have to go to art school to make street art. There's nobody telling you can't do it. So street art gives us the ability to create things outside of the normal modes of art. It's not beholden to the galleries, as I said. It's not beholden to art collectors. Ideally, money is not involved. The government's not telling you what you can and can't do because it's illegal anyway. In this way, it allows us to create things freely. We can create whatever we want, communicate what's important to us. Because we can communicate what's important to us or create freely, it allows us to challenge the status quo, to say things that might not otherwise be able to be said easily. In this way, street art serves the same purpose as the boy who said, "The emperor is not wearing clothes." And lastly, I think that street art is unique in the way that it is interactive and communicative in ways that other art is not. Street art is out in the street. It's not in galleries. So when people paint over or rip down a piece of street art, that's part of a conversation. In the same way, when people can protect and add to pieces on the street. This is a piece that I put up. You can see I was actually in the process of putting it up as this picture was taken. Now you can see it again 2 years later. It's changed a little bit. Now it says somebody's written Blitzkrieg across the bottom. There's an anarchist A symbol. It says, there is no justice reform. This piece that it was about justice reform, so somebody's added that there is none. And then there's also some comments directed towards the police. In some instances, I've even seen building owners paint around a piece of street art to extend its lifespan. And I think these are examples of ways that street art is interactive and communicative in ways that other art is not. So having told you why I believe street art is important for us as a society, I want to give you a look into my own practice as a street artist. It's been important for me to work collaboratively with my friends. And there are 3 things that I typically think about when I'm creating pieces. 1, I just want to surprise people, give them an image they might not have expected on the street. 2, to put forward new ideas or challenge the status quo. And 3, to give solidarity or comfort to people who might have been oppressed or ignored. So, like I said, collaboration is important for me because I believe it is important. It gives my work strength and it gives me a broader perspective. So for the last few years, I've been working with my friends, talking to them, asking them about topics that they want to talk about, things that are important to them. So typically what happens is, I work in 3 different mediums. I do stencils and acrylic painting. The stencils are with spray paint. This is an example of a piece that's both spray paint and stencils and acrylic paint. And then I also work with linoleum block prints. And this is a piece that I did kind of riffing off of one of my favorite artists, Kathy Kolowitz. So what happens typically for when I'm working on pieces with my friends is I'll take a picture of them. They'll model for me. I'll divide that photo into 4 to 7 different layers. Each layer will be painted separately as a different color, one at a time on top of each other on paper. And when that's finished, we'll have an image from all the different layers. Then I'll take some flour and water, boil it together. That makes a simple glue called a wheat paste. And I'll take that wheat paste out into the street, and I'll paste up my work onto typically abandoned or vacant buildings. Now, people often think that I must go out at nighttime, sneaking around in the dark. But I don't believe that what I'm doing is wrong, and so I don't want to act like it's wrong. I go out in the daytime, which actually is great because it gives me the ability to listen to people, the opinions of people who are passing by. Now, that's not to say that I'm not concerned about the police catching me, because I am, but the unfortunate reality is that as a white man, I'm less suspect to the police than a lot of other people. Sometimes my work stays up only one day if I haven't researched my location properly. But other times, as I showed you before, that piece has been up for a couple years, sometimes even more. Usually I think about 10 months is kind of like normal time. So this is a piece that I worked on with my friend Joanna. Joanna is from Syria. She was born in Aleppo. She wanted to talk about how the place where she's from no longer exists. Aleppo has been virtually destroyed by civil war racking Syria for the last 7 years. So in this piece, we have Joanna holding a mortar shell with the background of the map of the city of Aleppo. Different colors representing the opposition and government-held areas, as well as small X's denoting the areas that were severely damaged during the war. This is a piece I did about Mariel Franco. Mariel Franco was a queer black mother. She was a city council member in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. She used her platform on the city council to speak out about police violence against people of color in Brazil. In 2018, she was assassinated by 2 off-duty police officers. I created this piece with my friend João. João is from Brazil. He lives in New York now. On his shirt, he's wearing the names of women from the United States, black women, who were also shot by police. For me, talking about war in Syria or state violence in Brazil is important for my street art because oftentimes I feel like we don't have the opportunity to think about things outside of our own daily life. Even when these things can impact us, we don't realize it. So when we look at state violence devaluing black lives in Brazil, it can give us a way to look at our own society. Recently, I've been really impacted by the way that the sense of xenophobia and kind of distrust towards immigrants and refugees across the United States, both from the general populace and the government. I also know that for politicians and people in power, retaining power is done through creating fear. Fear of people who don't look like you and cultures that are different from our own. This has been problematic for me because immigrants and refugees have been important from as long as I can remember. In my 1st and 2nd grade class in Amarillo, Texas, almost all of my friends were immigrants and refugees, all my classmates. And now, living in New York City, immigrants impact my life every day, from the food I eat to the perspectives I gain from them. Even my street art name, Blanco, comes from playing pickup soccer games with Central American immigrants. So 2 years ago, I decided I wanted to challenge that narrative of xenophobia towards immigrants and refugees. I started painting portraits of a few of my friends who are immigrants or refugees, just writing their name, where they're from, and their occupation. Now, I started with just a few friends, but before I knew it, more and more people wanted to become involved, and now I've done over 30. This is kind of one spot. So I've put them in mass like this. I've also done the phone booths with art and ad places, so I put several pieces up like that, and I'll put individually spread around the street, in the streets of New York. So this is Diego. Diego's from Ecuador. He works in building management. This is Miguel. Miguel is from Barbados. He's a photographer. This is Sana. Sana is from Bangladesh. She's an aid worker. She's actually gone back to Bangladesh a couple times to work with Rohingya refugees there. This is Othman. Othman is from Iraq. Othman is studying to be a civil engineer. This is Catherine. Catherine's from the formerly divided Berlin. She's a librarian. Oftentimes, when we want to combat that narrative of xenophobia, we often say that this is a country of immigrants and refugees. But when we say that, we're overlooking the history of slavery and the indigenous peoples. And I didn't want to make that mistake. So, on the right, you can see, this is my friend Tommy. Tommy, like quite a few indigenous people I know, likes to use the slang term Indian to identify himself as indigenous, spelled NDN. Tommy's from the Kumeyaay Nation. The Kumeyaay live in both California and Mexico, across the border. And it was important for me, as you can see it says, all my friends are immigrants and refugees, except for my Indian friends. They've just been here since time immemorial. So that was important for me to point out that when we talk about people coming from Central America, many of these people are indigenous people. They've been here for thousands of years before there was something called a border. There's a saying in Mexico, nos no cruzamos la frontera cruza nos. We didn't cross the border crossed us. This is my friend Hrag. Hrag was also included in the Immigrants and Refugees series. Hrag is born in Syria, ethnically Armenian, a Canadian citizen, and he lives in New York. And that wasn't an uncommon thing for a lot of my friends, just the diversity and the complexity of the stories of immigration, multi-generational. But the thing is, Hrag, because he's not a US citizen and he was born in Syria, despite the fact that he's not Muslim, he would have fallen under the first Muslim ban that was proposed in 2017. He would not have been allowed to enter the country. Hrag shared a story with me that I want to close with you. So I put up Hrag's portrait in the street, and like a lot of my friends, he went to see it. He took a selfie, and then he was kind of hungry, so he went around the corner to get some falafel. He got in there, and the guy behind the cash register said, "Hey, I know you." Hrag was a little confused because he didn't recognize the guy. But the man continued, "I know you from the artwork out in the street. It's been great to have it there for the last few weeks. I appreciate it because I'm also an immigrant." For me, this is what motivates me. I think that this is an example of how street art can be impactful for us as a society. And I hope that my work continues to impact people in that way. Thank you.